This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Board-Deronay. The two of us are architects, of course, partners at the office and hosts of the show. And this week, it's the two of us in the studio, and we're going to try and answer the question of how does an architect and a designer and an aspiring architect get into the flow state of design?
I feel like that could be also a question for any creative.
True.
Right? I mean, how do you get
expanding the listenership to other creatives?
Yeah, here you go.
I don't know what we're going to say, so we'll figure it out. Sponsors. If you need to get 2D or 3D as-built of a project, then you should check out Canvas, an iPhone and iPad app. Here's how it works. Using Canvas, you scan the house, and then Canvas processes the scan to produce the as-built automatically, so you don't have to do any measuring. The file formats include ArchiCAD, Revit, AutoCAD, Vectorworks, SketchUp, and others. Canvas has been a great tool for us, and I know many of you will find it helpful, so check them out by visiting canvas.io/SSP or click the link in our show notes to schedule a demo and get your first as-built for free. Stop juggling multiple pieces of software and struggling with design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project, from mood boards to advanced specification tools, procurement tracking to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly errors. Join InterDesign movers and shakers by starting for free at programma.design/secondstudio. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for InterDesign workflows.
If you're looking for an ultra-fast and robust BIM computer program for architecture and or interior design, then we suggest you check out ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architecture and interior design firms around the world to 3D design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. As ArchiCAD continues to evolve with technological advances, architects can push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. We absolutely love ArchiCAD, and you can try the program for free, fully functioning, if you click the link in our episode notes.
This is The Second Studio with the two of us. Here we go. This question came up sort of through various listeners who reached out, not asking this specific question, but sort of around it. And I do think from an educational perspective, like in terms of teaching architecture and learning architecture when you're a student, this is one of the most important things you have to learn when you're in school. So perhaps this recording would be good for professionals who have lost that flow state in the day-to-day chaos of everyday real life, but also this is for students. That said, back when you were in school, Marina.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. Always looking for me for the answers, right? I don't have the answers.
But what did you do to try and be, productive and tap into that mindset where it's pure creativity?
I'm trying to look back, in my younger days. I did art school for a year and I did architecture school. So I'm trying to think about both. Although art school maybe was a bit easier because it was more assignment based. So, well, I mean, there is creativity too, but I don't know. I think it's always also something that I've struggled with. Like, also because I don't think I'm an artist with a very strong creative, drive. Like I'm probably more on the rational side of being an artist than like the chaotic, artistic, generally talented kind of creative. I feel like there is kind of like two types out there, right? And I'm more on like the rational type than like the naturally gifted type.
Okay.
So I do think that maybe because on what type you're in, there might be different ways to get into your comfort zone. Right? Gotcha. Like if you feel very comfortable using a medium, like painting is your thing, and you just feel like at home and it's easy for you, you could just paint for hundreds of hours and kind of like let yourself go and feel creative. Like I don't know how to get there because I don't think that's who I am at all. So
through painting specifically?
No, just through like, well, I guess maybe it's feeling very comfortable with a medium and comfortable in the sense that you feel free in expressing yourself, and you feel how do I say that? Like you're again stimulated, like your creative mind, it gets stimulated by the freedom that you have in that medium, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Like you're basically auto feeling yourself because of your comfort in like, let's say, this medium.
Okay.
right?
Okay, so sort of what you're saying is that finding.
And I think it also, if you're rational, creative, I think that's also something that you can aim to find.
Okay.
It might just be harder because you might not be as gifted into, let's say one of those mediums.
Okay, so what you're saying, let me try to translate based on what
it's
I
the
think
morning,
you're
so
saying.
my brain is a little bit
So
foggy.
what you're saying is that part of getting into that flow state is finding a way of working, and in this case, a specific medium like painting or drawing or whatever, that is you're more fluid and you have more dexterity and allows therefore the thinking to be more fluid.
Yeah, I think so. And that goes back to, like that exercise I did in art school where basically there is always like the inner you who's judging everything you do before you've even done it, right? And that's kind of limiting, I think, your creative freedom, is that you're killing options before you actually got a chance to explore it.
That's true too.
And I think that's also what makes a lot of artists feel very comfortable in the art that they do, is that maybe it's a matter of confidence or just feeling comfortable with themselves, but they're creative and they can just keep going and keep giving, because I don't think they have that voice speaking as loud as maybe one would. So I feel like if you can find that space where you feel free to explore and having fun and questioning and doing all of that without judging anything you're producing, that's kind of, to me, the ideal creative zone to get into, because you're already open to whatever is going to come to you, right? But I think that's very difficult to achieve, especially in architecture, where you're expected to deliver certain things. So this is always kind of running in the back of your mind, and it's kind of hard to let go of that in order to look at things in a much more free way.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's true. I think that there's definitely, and some of this bleeds over into the question of designer's block in a sense. So how do you make like progress when you're working? And it is, I think we were talking about it in one of the last recordings, it is a weird thing where sometimes, especially for architecture, which has to be both and balance between being very creative and artistic and more loose on one end of the spectrum, but also hyper rational, and is a very serious thing, because it's not art. It has to perform, and it has a direct impact in terms of function on people. So you can't afford to be like, oh, this is what I do. I'm an artist. It's a very serious thing when you do a building. But anyway, so in architecture, I think it's sometimes it's difficult, because when we want to make progress when you're designing, you feel like to do that there has to be structure, and as an architect that making progress in some ways means that I have these 10 things I need to accomplish in this building, and let's say they're functional things, right? And I must do those 10 things. So I know that making progress means completing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. However, that doesn't produce architecture. That just produces generic buildings. So there's that way of making progress in design. But the other thing that's necessary to make progress in design is to almost make no progress, which is to just kind of float and think and be free and let your brain kind of flicker around to come up with different ideas. And that's always the tension.
Yeah, and it's kind of like this awkward balance, and each project, each assignment is different. So it's not because you've done it once that you can repeat that process identically, every time.
Not the same.
Which is weird. But I think you're right. It is the balance between the rational, the analytical, and the creativeness of it. I found starting from nothing and being creative in architecture, I wouldn't even know where to start.
That's an interesting thing, because that's one of the mistakes I think students make also, is that they perceive the act of designing as being one where you're creating something from a blank page. But the reality is it's never really a blank page. There's always things to it's architecture, or the architecture itself and the act of producing architecture is responsive.
Yeah.
And so is art also. Like, you're responding to things, you're responding to society, to culture, to the people, to the program, to the site, to the wind, to the sun. You're responding to the technologies of our time, the technologies we aspire to use, the materials that we have at our fingertips. So it is a very responsive thing. So one of the things that then happens when students get stuck, it's usually because they don't have enough input information coming into the blank surface, quote, blank surface, or that information that they're getting is not the right information. And I know for me, at least, when I'm stuck on something, I know now after, many years, I'm like, okay, it's because I'm missing information. It's not because I don't have the skill or the talent or any of that stuff, right? It's because I'm missing information. And
for me, I think it's when I look at it only from one way.
Yep.
And I have to force myself in trying to look at it from a completely different lens to try and discover something else.
Well, that's also why talking to people is so helpful, right? I do think, so I'll give a quick example too. So like recently I was working on this project for the office, and it is a conceptual project in that it might not get built. And I'm working on this design, and I had a day where I was just struggling. I was getting kind of annoyed with it and myself. And then I realized I was struggling because I wasn't allowing myself to role play and take it seriously enough. Because I knew it's probably not going to get built, right? So therefore, a lot of constraints that would happen if it were to get built, I don't have to worry about. Which you would think, therefore, okay, well then it's easier.
No.
But in fact, as an architect, it's not easier because again, we respond to things. So then I had to say, okay, I have to pretend this is a real project and say, okay, this room is that room. What would make sense for that room? And then that informs the exterior of the building, and that informs this thing and that thing and this thing. So what happened was in that case, I was working on a few key moments of that project, which are the key moments, and every project has some key moments, but I was focusing on those, and I was getting stuck. So what I had to do is end up working on the other side of the project, which is not a key moment, and we might not really ever see, but I needed to do that as a way to kind of break loose in the process and get away from looking at that one thing, but also as a way to let those other things, which again might not be presented ever, inform the thinking of the rest of the project. And so that's another example of just, again, different information, even if it's information for something that's not, like, doesn't matter. Why would you place constraints on yourself if it's not going to matter or no one's going to see it? But I think probably for most architects would agree they can understand, like, that's, you need that. There's like, architects are very good at creating magic out of friction. That's like one of our specialties, is to look at problems and things that don't quite work and then create magic from it. I think architects in general are not the type of people to just spew out random stuff out of nothing, because that's not what we do, like, in practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, even for artists, right? Usually their art is a statement or a reaction to a problem, or something that they observe, and this is their interpretation. Like, it's not reactive always, but it is responsive most of the time. And if it's not, usually that's where the art kind of like is doubtful,
it's without foundation, it's without meaning.
Yeah, if it's just whatever, then I don't know if it's actually art.
I would also say, though, that I think for students, there is, almost just as an exercise, there is an immense value to sometimes working on a design problem or an entire project more as if there's a blank piece of paper. Because, and the reason why I say as an exercise, again, because I don't believe that's how you actually produce architecture, but it's a way to force yourself to really be out there floating in space with nothing around you, and to try and find your center and to try and find a direction. That, as a sensation when you're working, it's like working out, sort of like when you do some kind of sport, right? And you lift weights. Like, you're a soccer player and you lift weights. Well, you don't lift weights when you're playing soccer, right? But it's flexing the muscles, it's training the muscles for this other scenario. And that's how I kind of think about that thing, right? Allowing yourself to be lost and allowing yourself to approach a problem in a more blank page way, even if it's not quite real, but having that struggle, because there's different types of struggles you have to deal with when you're learning design or producing design. One struggle is trying to make everything work. Here's all this information. Here's 10 pieces of information. Make it work and get it to fit, and get to fit on the site and be functional, all that stuff. And then the other problem is, again, the blankness. How do you navigate the blankness, and how do you almost in a kind of psychological sense, how do you cope with that feeling when you have the sense of complete you're being lost? It's almost like a kind of a sports psychology kind of thing. It's more about that than it is anything else, I think, at least for me. The other thing you said is killing options when you're working, and that can be disruptive to the flow state. And I super agree with that. I think that
I am the worst at that. I'm the best at killing options.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
All right.
Well, I know that I'm better at that than you are. Well,
I feel like I kill options pretty quickly.
In a good way or a bad way?
I mean, I feel like the options I've killed in the past make sense to have been killed. But,
okay, well, then it's a good thing.
But sometimes I'm like, well, yeah, actually, I have no regrets.
Okay, well,
never mind.
Well, I think, even the term flow and flow state means you're cruising, right? There's flow, there's movement, there's continuity. And if you wouldn't, let's say you're sitting down, you're working on a I don't know, let's keep it simple. Let's say a physical model, and you're working on that model for about an hour and a half. And it's a study model. It's not a final model. So you're exploring design through that model. Physical model. Who uses physical models anymore? Yeah. But it's, if you imagine you have 90 minutes to work on this thing, right? And if you imagine every 5 minutes you start thinking of something and then you say to yourself, this is the dead end, stop, restart. Every 5 minutes you're restarting. Obviously you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And that, as I think of, is a very common issue with perfectionists, absolutely, and perfectionists who are creatives, is that you don't allow yourself to just go. And suspending disbelief is another phrase that's super critical to the design process, design thinking, and the flow state. And you have to suspend disbelief when you're working to a degree. And that feedback depends on the person, depends on the situation. Some people, they don't need to suspend the disbelief. They need more reality. But a lot of people, students especially, you need to suspend disbelief and just go with it. Yes, I know the scheme doesn't make sense. Yes, there's a huge fatal flaw, a cardinal sin that makes no sense at all for this thing. And I know I cannot do this in the final product. Suspend disbelief. Pretend that's not a problem.
Yeah.
And just go. And because you need to, it's sort of like another kind of analogy is, I don't know if anyone's listeners have ever been skiing, but if you go skiing, there's some days where you have good days and bad days, right? And if you're skiing down a hillside and you fall, like after the first 30 feet, and you get up again, and then you fall again another 30 feet, and for whatever reason, maybe it's a tough hill or it's a bad day, you just keep falling like every 30 feet. It's disruptive. And then once that happens like 3 or 4 times, it's almost guaranteed the rest of the hill, you're going to keep falling every 30 feet. And so that means that in that design process, it's the same thing. So you need to allow yourself the ability to just cruise, even if you're not going in the right direction.
I think that also goes back to more of like the design process.
Sure.
Maybe getting in the zone. So I don't want to get too off topic.
Sure.
When you need to get in the zone for designing something, like what do you do?
So going back to school days, right? As I said before, I think this is one of the really the biggest struggles students have, right? Students struggle with not being told what to do, but being asked to come up with something amazing. And that's extremely frustrating if you've never been posed with that situation. Students struggle learning the skills, like this technical softwares, the model making skills. But I think the one that's not talked about is that it's a real struggle to learn how to get into that mode. And one of the easiest ways is music. For me, at least, music as a way, not necessarily as a way to get into that state, but I think there has been scientific research that it proves that it does help change how a person feels and thinks, music, but also as a way just to drown out what's happening.
Yeah, like take off the distraction.
Yeah, because I think when I was in school, it was chaotic, and now with how many notifications pop up all the time in your AirPods and your phone, your computer, and your email, and your iPad, it's just constant.
Yeah.
flickering bells going off in different directions that have nothing to do with the purity of the task at hand. So
I think that has to do with anything we're trying to do, honestly. Just being able to focus without having, all of this stuff happening around you.
Yeah.
Like even just to do like any type of work, not just, creative work. Like I think it's really hard these days to just
I mean, it's the same like when you go to the
thing.
gym. What do you people do? You put on headphones and you listen to something that's going to get you into the mood. So music is a huge thing. Everyone that I went to school with, they always had headphones on to try and help them get into that space. Getting just more specific with that for funsies. So there's some groups I listen to, bands I listen to like consistently throughout school, kind of in a kind of strange, like on repeat too much probably.
In a ceremonial way.
But I always found music that was more instrumental and didn't have vocals to be more helpful. Right?
I could see that.
Because like the band Rat-a-tat, or Rat-a-tat, I don't know however you say it, right? It's pure instruments. Great band. And jazz. So the guy I listened to a ton was Don Ellis. And there's a few tracks. There's one song that I started listening to when I first started doing architecture in school. And this was actually an architecture summer camp when I was in high school. So this was before I went to Cal Poly. And this was when you had a CD player and I, whatever. And I would listen to his album, I think it was Don Ellis, 3 2/3 Quarter Time. And the first song is called Orientation. And I wish we could play it on here, but it's a weird rhythm. It's not a standard 4/4/3/4. And it's all just syncopation, right? And intense jazz. And that I listened on repeat, like I probably easily like 1,000 times in the history of like all my architecture school. And it starts off like and it's there's a way to get into the mode. And I liked it too because once you are in that mode of working, it's highly geometrical, right? The music. And so it fits with the computer stuff and the sketching. It kind of helps you almost like feel the design that you're doing, but in a different dimension, obviously. And it's sort of it's keeping you on your toes and providing, it's sort of like feedback actually, but just through music. So you do something and then there's like a beat that changes. You're like, okay, well maybe this moves around.
So looking at your models from school, you can tell this was on a Rat-a-tat song, this was on a Don Ellis song.
I'm not saying also that, and that's in terms of architecture production, that's pure form, right? That has nothing to do with conceptual thinking. It has nothing to do with like program cultures or anything like that. I'm also not saying that listening to those two groups or any other group is going to solve all your problems as an aspiring architect.
You're going to see a spike on Spotify on Rat-a-Tat's page.
Anyone? Okay, they have to listen to that. You have to listen to Don Ellis. You must listen to Don Ellis. It's a must. Orientation. What was his song? I think the song was called 3 2/3 Quarter Time. Fetus. I'm naming things from that album. Another song that was this is now just diverging. It's fun. Is Pussy Wiggle Stomp. I'm like, that's a fantastic name. That's a crazy name. But yeah, anything from Don Ellis is that's the shit. Electric Bath. He also had great names.
Electric Bath.
Electric Turkish Bath. He had great names for albums and for songs. Strawberry Soup. It's just phenomenal stuff. But that was my thing. People probably thought it was mental. It's like, that guy's headphones are really loud. It's been the same song for the last 6 hours.
Yeah, and you were wearing Crocs in school too, so that was kind of a weird combination.
Hey man, I was ahead of the curve before the Biebs was wearing the Crocs.
The Biebs.
Yeah, my friend. So anyway, so music was one thing. That's how it allowed me to at least drown out the noise. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I feel like, during architecture school, I never did any creative work at school. I was always back in my apartment. I could not focus with having other people around doing whatever they were doing. seeing them struggle on their own project or like work on like crazy cool stuff, and me being in the middle trying to figure out things. So kind of like being distracted by what was happening and what everybody was doing. Like I feel like even if I had music, that probably would not have been enough. I would have needed like a half dome to put over my head just to like get in my space.
Did you listen to music when you were on your own in your studio, or was it silence?
No, I think I listened to music.
You think?
I mean, it's been a while, so I don't remember. Yeah, no, I listened to music. I think it was more like coming out of my laptop speaker rather than being in my ears, because I was in my apartment. So,
sure, fair.
Didn't need to. But I never really did any creative work in school. Also because of the distraction of the surroundings, but also because of the comfort or non-existing comfort of the setup.
At home or in the studio?
In the studio, because we didn't have dedicated desks. So how am I supposed to grab a 2x3 space on a shared common table in a giant space while lighting is awful? There is a bunch of stuff happening, and I'm supposed to produce amazing stuff in this environment. Like I can't.
What kind of lighting did you guys have that was so bad?
Oh, it's like neon lighting, like typical.
No, not neon lighting.
No, but like the fluorescent lighting, like the ceiling tile.
Neon lighting, wow.
Well,
super
in
moody.
French we call that the neon.
Oh, really?
Not
okay.
Fluorescence. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was like really white light.
Did you have like desk lamps?
Well, there's no desk lamps.
Oh, no.
Most of the students didn't have like fixed desks. It was just like a bunch of tables for everybody to grab on whatever studio and level they were in.
It sounds like a cafeteria setting or something.
It was a shit show. So it was not inclusive in, producing anything good. And anybody who managed to do creative work in that space, like I was in awe, because I was like, I don't know how you could do that, but I can't. Depending on like people's living situation, if you don't have space, if you live far, you gotta bring a lot of materials over and this and that. Like some people had to use the school space, but I never did that. So I very much worked in my woman cave, in my teeny tiny, I'm not a man, so my woman cave.
Not a man.
Not that I know of, right?
Okay.
But, like having your setup, having your tools, having like knowing where things are, having the space. I think I had 2 tables, like how do you call the legs that folds for a table?
Folding table. No?
No, it was not a folding table. I just had like a plywood top and like folding legs.
It's like sawhorses?
Yeah, sawhorses.
Okay.
I had like two desks, and one was for my computer. The other one was for me cutting. And
I love it.
And like glue everywhere. Yeah. And like all that mess. But I would get in my zone, I remember it was my second apartment in Paris. It was on the ground floor, and it was at an interior courtyard. So I would have like the window open on the courtyard. I had my ferrets living with me, like running around, and I sound like a crazy person.
It sounds like a scene from a movie. I love it.
I had my teeny tiny kitchen, and
your friend Emily would visit you and bring you croissants.
My good friend from school was living 2 doors down. So we're in the same courtyard, which was awesome, because she had her creative space. I had my creative space. We would meet up, like in the evening to watch TV show or whatever.
Do I know this friend?
Yeah, Feriel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Super talented architect.
But what was great is that I was in my zone. It was, my comfortable setup. No one was looking over my shoulder as to what I was doing. No one was distracting me from me trying to get into my stuff. It doesn't mean it was easier for me to get into my zone and being creative, but I had more control, so that worked really well. I did listen to music, but I think still to this day, I listen to very different kinds of music, and it has more to do with my mood,
energy,
like my energy and my time at the moment I'm working. Mm-hmm. So like even like right now when I'm working on projects, I could be listening to reggae, I could be listening to like more like Indian meditation or instrumental music. That's why the office smells like weed
all the time. I was like, where's this coming from?
It's not me. I wish it's not me. My work would probably be more creative if I was smoking weed, but it's not me.
Clients would be like, what is this drawing? That's a circle, man.
It's a peace sign.
It's the essence of life.
It's a yin and the yang. And some other times I might listen to jazz, or I might listen to rock and roll. Like it really depends. Like
I think,
what state I'm in, and I think that helps me feeling more comfortable with myself, maybe, and kind of like turning everything off. So yeah, but I mean, now in the office, I do put headphones in to get in the zone because hearing just the slightest noise, it could be distracting.
I think also the more disruptive your life is, and not even from like a physical or audio like notifications going up, when you have a lot of stuff going on in your brain, as we do, it's hard just like internally just to drown out yourself, like even to sleep. I haven't been sleeping the last like 2 months. My brain is just going too fast in two different directions, but you need that. I agree with the music as a way to kind of bring a certain energy to the table, especially when you're tired and you're like, I need to kick it up a notch, and you turn on some like AC/DC or something. But I think, the environment that you're working within and the environment you cultivate around you is very important. So the school that I went to, we had they refer to as cold desks, meaning that's your own desk. Like this is your desk for the entire quarter or semester, whatever. It was a quarter system, and that's it. And then thesis year, that's your desk for the year. Like this is your spot. And there's, I think, goods and bads to that because, right, sometimes you get too fixed in one thing, you need to break and be loose. But the benefit of having your own desk for at least a quarter is it becomes comfortable. In terms of creating an environment that allows you to focus, there was always a huge debate between these kind of two camps of students at my architecture school. And briefly, I'll describe the two camps. What happened when I was a freshman, I think it was a freshman, you got to choose two different tracks for the first year of education. And one track was the new track, and they blended together the computer software education and a studio. It was blended together. It's this new thing, blending together. And the other track was that you separated those things. And so in the separated track, you had studio that was all analog, and then you had digital courses that were completely separate. They didn't interact with each other in terms of their curriculum or syllabus or anything. And that created this kind of a schism between these two sides. It tended to be that the cool kids, or they thought they were cool kids, they took the route of the integrated approach. They were all black. They were wearing skinny jeans before it was popular. That whole kind of thing. And then when you get to the studios later on, you go to second, third, and fourth year, everyone's together. So now you have these two camps, the cool kids and what would appear to be the not cool kids together. And one side wanted all of the lights, everyone would work at night, right? One side would want all of the lights in the studio to be completely turned off and all the overhead lights turned off, and only have your personal desk lamp and then your laptop as your source of light, and that's it. And the other side wanted the lights on so we could fucking see what we're doing and not have it look like we're working in some kind of cave. Camp. And it's silly things in school and how immature people are. People like got really angry over one or the other, which is kind of understandable because like you're trying to work at night, you don't have any time as a student, and you got some idiot turning on the lights or turning off the lights, and you're like, but I'm trying to like work, you keep turning off the lights, And then people got into arguments and stuff. But
just get one of those giant floodlights.
Just for yours.
A giant projector.
Beaming like a construction
Put
light.
A mirror around it.
But the having a desk lamp and everything dark, I had read at the time that actually it's not good for your eyesight to have that much contrast, but it did supposedly allowed you to kind of focus on your space and have a more intimate feeling and not be distracted by what's beyond your desk. But anyway, it's a long way of saying I do agree that having an environment around, that your environment does play a big role in terms of how you can focus in the early days. And I think that's why everyone in school was so particular with the lighting and other things, because we're novices. We were trying to figure out like, what is, like, we need all the help we can get to get into the zone. Now it doesn't really matter so much. I can get into the zone anywhere. I can do it on an airplane if I need to.
But it takes practice,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I still have to say lighting is a big thing for me in general.
Well, now
in making me comfortable or dizzy or really like not into something. Like.
Well, I think these days for us and for like the working employee and practicing architect professional is more about having enough natural daylight. As a student, you get plenty of natural daylight.
In general, even like artificial lighting. Like if I'm going to a a conference or something. It's something that's like I have a very hard time with.
Yeah. That's because there's a lot of bad lighting too.
The other thing I think so to kind of like get in the zone is I think you have to allow enough time for yourself to do that, to get there. You know, if you're trying to like cram some work and like, I don't know, like an hour, half an hour, and you're hoping to get in the zone, be productive and like, you know, have something, like, I think you have to block a chunk of time.
I think you need more time when you're younger also, when you're learning how to get into the zone.
Yes.
Like you might need 3 hours.
You can't put like so much pressure and expectation on something to work out where you're still trying to understand like what is your zone and how do you get there. So I think blocking, like turning off any distraction, finding a space that's comfortable, but also like allowing enough time for you to get there.
That's interesting because when I think you're true. I think you're right. And when I think back on my time in school, I needed a lot, especially in the early years, right? I needed a lot of time to be productive versus if I zoom forward to now, if I have a design task I need to solve or to do, and I mean design in the creative sense, not like a construction detailing thing, but something that requires like a lot of quote creativity, especially with like concept design phase or something. You know, it depends on the task, but usually like half an hour is enough for me to make some really good decisions in that time. But when I was a student, no way. I need like, but I think, you know, the other thing I was going to say is, like one of the questions that comes up, I think more so these days, is whether or not students should be doing all-nighters.
I don't think it's necessary. Again, I've only done a handful of them in my last year of architecture school.
We know.
I do not believe that it's necessary. That being said, I'm not saying I do not believe you have to work hard and a lot. I'm just saying you need your sleep in order to be efficient and do good work.
I agree. And obviously, all-nighters they're horrible for your health, and they should be. One should try and avoid them. However, I do feel like for myself, and I think for a lot of students, like call it like, especially if you go to school and it's a university and you do GEs, general education courses, like your day is packed and there's not a lot of time to do homework. It's homework is what it is. It's not a lot of time. Because, you know, it's like you have studio, which your life is dedicated to, but then you're taking English and like chemistry and I don't know, whatever other things. And it's really hard. So the reason why I think all-nighters are to be expected and are acceptable is because I found, for me at least, when I was in school, I didn't have a good solid 3 hours in the middle of the week, not the weekends, like the middle of the week to work on stuff, unless it was from, in my case, because I did band, it was late. It was like after dinner. It was from 8 to 11 or 9 to 12. Like I didn't have, and actually the first, second, and third years, I needed more than 3 hours to actually be productive because I'm trying to get in that flow state. That takes me a long time. And a lot of stuff I produce is going to be crap, even more so when you're younger. So I need like 5 hours to work. And I just can't find that time in the middle of the week. At least I couldn't. So that's also why I think...
Were you making schedules?
That's also why I think there's... You know what? The thing with making schedules is when you have no time during the day, there's no such thing as making schedules. It's the same thing as like, are you managing your money? If you're poor, there's no fucking managing money.
Well, did you have class every day from like 8 in the morning until 9 p.m.?
Yeah, it was constant class with like an hour and a half break here and there, which is not enough time to try and do something. Well, then you chose to do
music, so, you know, you're just adding to your plate. That's on you, man.
No, but so what I'm saying is that even if you don't do music, I think that's also why people do all-nighters. Look, there's a lot of negative reasons. People aren't organized. People procrastinate. They do it because there's a culture that happens late at night, which is actually a very positive thing, but also like you shouldn't be wasting time and having pizza and drinking beer in studio. You should be working. So there's a lot of other reasons why all-nighters take place, and some of them not good. But I think one of the valid reasons that I thought about the other day is that because you need to find, again, that time and space where it's unadulterated. And the beauty of when you're working really late at night at like 12 midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., which I concede you're not going to be as productive, but in terms of the environment, it's quiet. There's nothing else happening. The world is shut down. And it does give you, especially if you're learning about how to do design and architecture, it does give you that break. It's like time has paused and you can breathe, and now you can actually think and not feel like, okay, wait, when is my next class? It's in 45 minutes. Okay, let me try to work on this thing real quick, right? You actually have, if you can stay up late enough and you have drink enough coffee, you actually have 4, 5, 6 hours of just pure time. Of course, it gets wrecked by the fact that you're staying up late, but still, that is it's. I wish I could capture that and have it and insert it into the middle of the day sometimes. But I think that's why it happens.
It actually makes me wonder. I was like, maybe I should have done architecture school a different way. Can you re-enroll and re-get a degree you already have?
Of course you can. They would happily take your money.
Yeah. Well. Something to think about.
But you know what I mean? Like I think that's part of it.
No, I mean it makes sense, and I understand. You know, like I very much enjoy the days where I can wake up early and I feel like I'm a little bit ahead of the rest of the world. Like there is kind of like a winning feeling, and also you feel like you're ahead of yourself, which is great. Were you working on the weekends on your stuff?
I worked constantly. Yeah. I one of my I wouldn't call it a regret, but I that's all I did was work in the studio.
Yeah.
I would work in the studio and then, go out when a review was done and just drink a bunch, but it was just studio.
I mean, I think during the week, like I would go back to my apartment and work maybe until it was bedtime. And then I would...
When was bedtime?
I don't remember back then, but probably like 11, something like that.
It's pretty late, yeah.
I might have pushed it if there was like a deadline coming up and I had to, but I've always like gone to bed to make sure like
you're healthy the next day.
I was healthy the next day.
Yeah.
But all my weekends were spent like working on projects.
Yeah.
My parents were not living too far, so I was living by myself in Paris, and my dad would come pick me up every Friday night on his way back from work to our house.
Oh, cool.
So I would bring all of my shit from architecture school, my boards, my materials, my cutting tools, my glue, my stuff, get to my parents, spend the weekend there, just be upstairs working on my projects all weekend, clean up that desk, repack all my shit, drive back to Paris like at 4 in the morning on Mondays, and then do that again.
4 in the morning, gosh, because it's a huge commute. Did you find that did you do that consistently, like every other weekend?
Pretty much every week. I would rarely stay in Paris over the weekend.
For all of the years, or just for the first 3 years?
The last year of school, probably not as much. But the other years, pretty much every week.
Oh, I didn't know that. Did you find that...
Because I didn't really like living by myself.
Sure.
And I was a student. I didn't have that much money to spend and go out.
Yeah,
and a lot of friends on the weekend, they were out of town. So I didn't... and you're living in a studio apartment, it's one room. Like at some point you want to get out.
Yeah.
My parents have a backyard, they have a space, they have a big room where I could do my models, and my parents would cook me food, they wash my laundry. I didn't have to go to the laundromat, take care of all this shit. So I was just...
Did you find that those weekend quote breaks, I mean break meaning like a change in environment and scenery and whatnot, do you think that helped you be productive and was refreshing? Like you got a new perspective just from that shift?
No, I think it was hard actually. I think it would have probably been much easier just to stay in Paris for the weekend and do my stuff.
Really?
Because it was a lot of commuting and then logistic, and then you're with your family and they want to hang out, they want to have dinner, they want to do this.
I couldn't do that.
I was coming downstairs, have my lunch in 15 minutes, running back up, trying to finish my assignment, and then I was making my own boxes to package my models so I could commute in the bus without breaking it for my review. And it was just...
See, to be...
It was great, but I didn't have to do laundry or cook food, but it was actually... more to deal with in a way.
I couldn't. I attempted to work on projects a few times at my childhood house with my parents around. Couldn't do it. Even if they were fairly respectable and they were like, okay, do your thing, come out for... I couldn't do it.
And it's funny because, I love my parents and they love me, but you know, when they're like, oh, it's 8 p.m., time for dinner, and they said that 3 times and you're still like trying to glue that piece and it's not sticking. And you're like, I will come when I'm done.
Do you understand the significance of this piece of cardboard?
And they're like, and you know, in your mind, it's like, I just want to get to that milestone and then I feel like I could go and eat food. But for them, they get annoyed because you're not showing up. And I'm like, you know?
So there's a couple thoughts. The one is that, you know, as you're telling me that story, it's been a while since I've taught architecture directly with students. But when I came across students who work like that and are that passionate, I have so much respect for them because it's just exciting. It's a person who has found, maybe it's not their calling for the rest of their life, but they found something that they're dedicating themselves to that's beyond just themselves. And I think that is something that we should all look for and probably do more of these days rather than aspire to be fucking Instagram influencers or something. And it's just, it's great. I feel good when I see that, and it excites me more so than like, oh, look at me. I'm on Instagram. I'm like doing things on Instagram. It's like, okay, but I don't know why that came to mind. I mean, like, let's be honest, even for all the influencers and the ones that people like, let's be real here. 99.9% of the content is the same thing you've seen everywhere, and it's generic, basic. It's what do they call it? Basic stuff.
Bitch.
It's the basic stuff. I'm like, yeah, this is not new or interesting information. Like, why do we care about this? But anyway, so that's exciting. But the other thought that came to mind is that, you know, talking about the all-nighters, and, you know, we did a recording about mental health like a couple of years ago, and people were like, oh, I can't believe that you're advocating for, I don't know if I was, but, you know, I can't believe you're advocating for all-nighters, and mental health is so important now, and balance and this and that. And yes, of course, you know, scientifically it makes sense. However, if you ever meet someone who's really passionate about whatever it is they're doing, right? Do you think that they're going to, when it comes to for bedtime at 10 p.m. and they've found a new idea, do you think that they're going to go to bed and say, yeah, I'll do it tomorrow? Or are they going to stay up and work it out?
Yeah.
They're going to stay up. And that's also, I saw this clip, I think it was on Instagram, that I forget who it was. I think it was an entrepreneur. They were saying the rule set of going to bed at a good time and waking up, you know, on time and having a schedule, that makes sense for the average person. For the people who are dedicated and for the people who want to achieve the top 1% of success and change the world, that as a way of working does not work. And I think from the outside, looking back at it, it doesn't work. And from internally, when you find that thing, there's no way I'm going to bed if I find a good solution at X time at night. I'm not going to have dinner at 8 p.m. I'm not going to have lunch with you. I'm going to stay and work this out. And how long is that going to take me? I don't know. And I do not care. I do not care. It might take me an hour. It might take me 6 hours. I might be up the next 2 days. As long as I feel like I'm somewhat productive and I'm on that path, I will pursue it. I do not care about anything else.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think it's just that it doesn't need to be like that for every day the rest of your life.
No, I agree.
It could be, burst of that happening, and that makes sense. Like Einstein didn't discover his discovery because he was going to bed at 8 p.m. every night and waking up at 6. Like he probably spent more time one of those days thinking about the questions he was thinking about, right?
It's not to say that we can't, that we have to do what's been done in the past, of course, but if you look at anyone who, any of the well-known successful people who have made a really significant impact, they're not going to bed religiously at whatever time and eating healthy all the time. They're sacrificing things when that moment happens.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying you should, like you said, you shouldn't do it all the time. It's not healthy, all those things, but I do get annoyed when people are like, you should never do an all-nighter. I'm like, no, yeah,
No, sometimes you might need one. I don't think it should be a pattern.
Yeah, sure.
Like a normal pattern of living, because I don't think it's always necessary.
So I think the in fact, to be honest, the all-nighter does have a lot of good things it brings in small doses, let's say. And then going back again to working to that flow state and finding that huge chunk of time. But I think your goal, let's say as a student, if you find late nights to be productive for you, and look, some people are built differently. Some people we know who are adults, they work through the night, and that's just like who they are.
Yeah.
That's fine. But for the average person, if you're doing that, you're in school and you're learning architecture, your goal should be to reduce that and try to find that hyper-productive flow state without needing that amount of time.
Yeah, because, at some point you're going to graduate. You're going to work somewhere. And it's great if you're super good, but if you are super good when you're at home at 3 a.m, might not work for an office very well.
Yeah.
And even for your lifestyle, that's not going to work. So
yeah, that's a really good point too, because in school also, at least when you have permanent desks, right, you have the ability to craft your life very specific, your life and your environment very specifically around finding that productive state to work, to be in.
Yeah.
And then you leave school, you don't have your personal desk, you don't have your personal space. You can listen to headphones, listen to music at work, but you don't have all these things that you've structured around the studio. It doesn't exist anymore.
And that's something that's difficult because it takes time, and it's difficult to find like how do you get into your headspace in school to be creative and do the work you have to do. And that doesn't necessarily transpose to once you start working for an office because of all the things we discussed, right? So you kind of have to do that again potentially when you start working somewhere. And part of me wishes that I could have been creatively productive in school in an environment that was extremely chaotic and be super resilient and still be able to produce stuff that way. Because when I started working in offices, depending on their size too, like if you work in big offices, there's like big cubicles with hundreds of people walking around you and high up and lower end staff and whoever is walking by your desk and seeing what you're doing. It could be intimidating. It could be, you could feel stuck and not, comfortable enough to do the stuff you have to do. So I think once you start finding how to get into your headspace creatively, you should aim to challenge that comfort.
Oh, that sounds...
But that's probably more something that happens, toward like the last year or so of your schooling,
Yeah. I say for myself, I barely got through school as it was, let alone trying to...
I did all-nighters, like again, a few times to like manage deadlines, rarely. But I think I did more the last year of school with the thesis project. And I think it was mostly because of production. Because the amount of time... Yeah. Because you're looking for the great idea for your thesis project, and that takes a lot of time to get there. And once you have that, you need to express that physically to, communicate that to people. And the quality of this visual production takes a lot of time. So. Yeah. And now a little break for our show sponsors. We're supported by Enscape. Enscape is a real-time visualization and VR tool that we personally use and recommend. And the reasons why we like it is that it's fast, realistic, and actually easy to use. The interface is great and they have a good library of components. It also renders in real time, which means that you don't have to waste time waiting for the image to be rendered to see what it's going to look like. It's also a plugin that works with all of the major 3D modeling programs, and it's available for Mac and PC. So if you want to up your visualization and rendering game, I think you should look into Enscape. So make sure you click on the Enscape 3D link in our show notes for a free trial.
If you're starting to laser scan your renovation projects for accurate as-builts, you'll want to hear this. Imagine that you've been awarded a big project, but not surprisingly, your client hands over wonky CAD drawings from 17 years ago. No worries. Meet Integrated Projects, or IPX for short. IPX is a scan-to-BIM platform that converts your 3D point cloud file, which is produced from any major LiDAR camera, into standardized BIM and CAD files. The best part is that they lay out the price and turnaround time instantly. That means starting your interior renovation project on the 50-yard line with an accurate set of drawings in 3D and 2D. Click the IPX link in our show notes to launch the platform for free.
The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk. Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire.
Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders. The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to support this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in our show notes. I was not the most organized person. I wouldn't say I was unorganized in terms of... Like, I wasn't wasting time in that. Like, when I was in studio, I wasn't messing around. Like, I wasn't doing that, but I just had a hard time in the design process, making progress for various reasons. But I do remember, and I worked a lot. And I do remember it was, I think, third year, I had this teacher, and it was just so much work. And I think it was some of the studios I took, like, they just assigned an excess of work.
Yeah.
Like, even, it was the only people who actually completed the assignments, like, forget whether or not they're good or bad, just completed all the assignments, was like one person in the studio. Everyone else couldn't complete everything, right? And I do think that there's some value in that kind of boot camp approach, as much as, like, who's the generation below? Gen X? Were they Gen Z? Whatever. The younger generation can complain about. I think there's value in that. But that happened consistently through a lot of his studios that I took. And I think it was third year, we were all just so beat, like, not just tired, but beat up. And we were visiting offices as part of, like, not a vacation, what do you call it? Like a field trip kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Visiting this office. And after the formal kind of visit ended and we were kind of hanging around the office, everyone could ask questions to the person who, the architect in the office who gave the tour. So I went up to him. It was just me, him, and the teacher. And this is how little I cared about this professor. I asked the architect, I said, I'd want to know from you, like, here's my problem that I'm having as a student. I want to know what you think. I said, I have so much stuff to do for this class and for all of my other, like, 5 and 6 classes. I cannot get the work done. Like, I feel like I don't have enough time. I can't get it done. And before the architect could reply, the teacher replied for him, saying, well, you just need to be more organized, which A, I'm not asking you, shithead. I'm asking the architect. B, I'm clearly asking him despite you being in front of me because I think your class is bullshit. Like, I did not like this professor. And I forget if the architect said anything, but that was, like, the answer from me. Well, just manage your time better. I'm like, no, dude, it's too much work. And I'm the only one saying it, but all 22 of us feel the same way. It's too much work. And I'm not saying it, again, I think there was value in going through that, but it was too much work. And so there is also the reality of when there's so much work, there is not enough time unless you stay up late. That's the reality. Sometimes that's the case.
Yeah, and I think also that could paralyze a lot of students in, like,
it really can.
like even getting any of it done because they just feel, like, way overwhelmed, Well,
like, what happens is that
like the students who are already not, let's say, not that great.
Sure.
Right? Or maybe they're not that creative. They have the designer's block. And then on top of that, there's just, like, it's this mountain they have to climb and they're, like, discouraged before even starting. Mm-hmm. So
what happens in those cases is students just internally, when they're working late at night, we all just agree, like, not agree, but we all talk about, so are you going to do that drawing? No. Yeah. And the first time I heard that, I'm like, wait, you're not? You're supposed to do it.
Like a coalition.
And it's like, no, I'm not doing it. And I turn over to that person. Holly, you doing it? No. What about that drawing? I'm going to do that one, but I'm not doing that one. And it was just for some, especially the transfer students who are older.
Secret agreement between students.
Yeah, the older ones were like, I'm not doing it. There's not time. I don't have time to do that. I will focus on the thing that I feel I need to focus on. And there, and teachers will hate me for saying this, but there's some truth to that too. Like, as a student, you need to know when for the sake of the project, forget your grade and the requirements. For the sake of the project itself, conveying the essence of the project, which things you should focus on. Yeah. And there is also, and that's also the reality, frankly, with any project. Even if, like when we're working on stuff, right? We don't have, how do I put it? Like, so in school, you're told to do a floor plan, roof plan, 2 sections, and a long and a short, a wall section, all your elevations, a site plan, a model, and like 3 renderings. And the renderings have to be these types of, there's like the list of things you have to do. But the reality is that for every project, especially in the early design phases, I don't need to look at all those things because that's not relevant. That's not the most important thing for this project at this point in time.
Yeah.
And in school, you're asked to do those 10 things I mentioned. That's like a standard list, like every single deadline. And that's also, now this is just talking about design and things and deliverables. That's also part of the problem, is that it's not a one size fits all. So like when I was teaching, I would give them that list, and I always played two roles as a teacher. One was like the teacher that's saying this is what you have to do. And the other was like, but by the way, don't do all of them if you don't feel like you have to do all of them. And some of the students are like, what are you talking about? Like,
is this a test?
Like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, no, seriously. Like you should do all of them, but I know you don't have time. You only have 2 weeks before it's due. So decide on what's most important and then do that.
Well, and also, I mean, depending on the student's project and their ideas, right? Like a section might not actually show anything. You might just need like 5 floor plans to show the concept what you're trying to show. So, and actually that's something that's interesting because, in France it was the same. I think it was not super prescriptive, but there was a list of deliverables you had to respect. And I did wish that teachers would help us understand and question and help us decide what we felt we needed to convey ideas. I mean, I understand it's good to give deliverables because then it has to imply like time management strategies on which one to prioritize, which one's most important, hierarchy and all of that stuff. But I think as an architect, like further down the road, knowing which documents will help you show which ideas to a client or an audience, I think is very important. And I don't think I was quite aware in school. I mean, sections were always beautiful depending on like where you were cutting, and those are kind of fascinating drawings. But like, I feel like the understanding the different nature of the documents and what they could convey, and I kind of like use them as superpowers or super tools, depending on what you wanted to show. Yeah. I don't think we've ever really been taught that.
You should have had me as a teacher. It's hard because you have to learn. I mean,
you see which one's best once it's produced, but sometimes you're, like you were saying, like you don't necessarily even need to produce those drawings if it's not breaking anything.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
And then one could argue that, well, if it's not good, that means that's a weakness in the project, and there's some validity to that too. But anyway, so I don't know how we got onto that, but the other thing I'll mention is that, I remember when I was trying to find, so we get a lot of inquiries from people who are about to start architecture school or have started, or they're interested, and they're wondering, what time is it? They're wondering like, what is it going to be like? What can I do to prepare these kinds of things? Which I won't answer because we've already talked about it before, or we can do another recording about it. But I think one of the things that's very difficult to prepare for, but you just have to be ready for, is just being frustrated and lost, and you need to be very resilient. So what happens is in the first 1 to 2 to maybe even 3 years, depending on the student, you just feel lost. You don't know what you're supposed to do to figure this thing out, and no one's telling you. And every time you do it, it's not good enough, and you have to do it again, and you just don't know. You literally don't know what to do. Like, that's the best way you don't know what to do. And you can spend that's why it takes a long time to work. Half an hour, 1 hour, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, 7 hours, all-nighters, 3 all-nighters. And then I rest more. I still don't know what to do. And I think it was my first year. I would like be in studio. I would try, okay, I'm going to work in studio. No, I'm going to try work in the library. I've heard the library is like a place where people work. And my, for so-and-so said, oh, they get all the work done in the library. I'm going to go to the library. I'm like, this doesn't work for me. It's dusty. I don't like it. Okay, I'm going to take a walk at night and I'm going to try it. Okay, maybe if I sit on this bench and do some sketching on a bench. Like that's what like artists do. They sit on a bench and sketch. Maybe that'll help. Oh, that didn't do anything at all. Maybe I take like a photograph. That'll help. Oh, that didn't do anything. And so you're constantly trying all these random things that you think are going to help based on what other people are doing, what you see in the movies, all what your teacher says. And I'll tell you, like, almost nothing works. Nothing will work. And so what is the solution? The solution is resiliency. Just to endure and just keep trying different things and trying the same things over and over, and just endure and put in the time. There's no other way around it than just putting in the time. And there's no recipe. There's nothing I can say other than just if there's enough time and if it's meant to be, meaning you are meant to be an architect and a designer, you will get there. But it just takes time.
No, it was the same for me. It was like, oh, I'm going to buy these different pens and these different felt tips and this paper and this tape and this tool. And, it's the secret to doing good drawings, good models, or this or that. But it's a testing ground, right? I mean, you're there. You should be testing all of the things you can when you're in school, because once you start working, time is limited. You don't have the time and the luxury and the brain space and the freedom of brain, to just think about testing things. Like, you're worried about paying your rent and making money and keeping your job. Like, the list of priorities switch.
Yeah.
So when you're in school, you should really experiment. Even if something works, try something else. See if it works too, or if it doesn't.
Agreed. Now, this goes back to what you said in the beginning of working through different mediums, right? And I remember the pen thing made me laugh because it was I think first it was, okay, Prismacolors. Prismacolors are going to be I think that's going to help me. Okay, that didn't work very well. Okay, maybe really soft lead, like a 4B. Okay, I'll try that. Then really hard lead. Okay, maybe somewhere between the two. Maybe I need to use my main line. Then I'll use a computer. Oh, then I'm use charcoal. Louis Kahn used charcoal. I'm using white trace. Well, he used I'm gonna use yellow trace and charcoal. That's how I'm gonna find this project. It's gonna help me do this thing. And
it's funny because
there's no magic solution. I mean, some are, and the other thing too is that I think it's easy to think that is going to solve your problem because the super senior well-known architects have their way of doing things. Frank Lloyd Wright just thought of stuff. Stephen Hall does watercolors. Zaha Hadid did painting. Everyone not everyone, but a lot of people have their things. And you think...
I also wonder how many actually just did that twice in their year and it became their thing and
let's be
never
honest,
done
right?
it, right?
And so, but there's a little bit of thinking, well, let me find that thing, or let me grab onto what they've done, or grab onto what the teacher does, and that's my safety. Because if they do watercoloring, then I'm going to do watercoloring, and then at least I know that I'm doing what someone else does, and they're successful, so I'm okay. No,
it's not an equation.
It's not an equation. You got to keep trying stuff, and I'm telling you, expect that nothing's gonna work.
Yeah.
The only advice other than just endurance is you got to complete stuff.
Yeah.
Like you said, you can't kill things before options or assignments before. You have to complete options by yourself, at your desk internally, let's call it, and you need to complete assignments and pin up. If you do that, then it'll work out. But you got to put in the time.
Then if it's good or bad, it's another question. It's the second question.
Yep.
The first is
almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, the techniques, it's interesting. Yeah, I went to art school and we tried, we did everything, right? We did oil painting, water painting, charcoal, ink, all kinds of stuff. And I did wish that in architecture school, our teachers in school would present the options of mediums that are available and kind of let students just get a feel for it and pick the one that they feel comfortable with, rather than being everybody bring your micron pen 0.025 because today we're doing axonometric drawings and we all need to use the same pen. And I'm so all of our drawings look the same. I mean, I that this is too much of an equational way of doing creative work, and I feel like we could be a bit more loose here, and that's probably where you discover your comfort zone, or maybe where you start having fun with axonometric drawings where you never would have otherwise,
Yeah, I also think that in the first and second year, especially, so students might not be aware of this. I don't know why they would be, but the way that undergraduate architecture school is structured is that the first 2 years are more structured, obviously, and then as you go on, there's less structure. So people think on year one that the assignment is going to be, okay, design a library, right? And you need a library with so many rooms, so many reading spaces, and it's going to hold so many books and the front desk, design a library. No way. That you don't get as a problem, as an assignment until... That depends on the school, but let's say year 3 or even year 4. You don't actually have a lot of freedom until maybe even year 5. So the first 2 years, it's a lot of different exercises, is what I would call them, and assignments. They're you could call them miniature projects, but they're not projects in the sense that it's not like you have, you're not the auteur of the project. Mm-hmm. So they're like the assignments. And there's these exercises you go through. And that's where I think the teaching in the early years is from what the teacher needs to do is they need to be a good cheerleader, a good person that's good at listening and helping young people solve life problems and time management and help them think through design, yes, but also the curriculum is like super important because that's where the education of, like I said, being lost and confused, it's really going through these little miniature assignments is how you slowly build up, not a repertoire, but kind of just that's how you build the way of working for yourself, instead of just being tasked to do it on your own. If you gave a first year student that library assignment, nothing would ever happen. It would take 100 years maybe before like they produce anything of any value, and they might not ever happen, right? So that's why in the first few years things are much more broken down. So that again just goes back to just complete the work, and if you complete the work in the first 2 years, at that point you'll know whether or not you should be doing this or not.
It's funny because I think my first year studios, I don't think we had any like abstract project.
That's crazy.
Like I think the first project I did was some kind of like observatory or something.
But they must have been very tightly framed.
They were pretty tightly framed.
Yeah. So.
But that model was really funny looking. Like I was so excited about making models and using different materials. I had glued like gravel on one side of the facade and like wood on the other side, and then I was very experimental with like the material aspect of my buildings. I had this other project, I think it was also first year. It was we call that like a media library in Paris. And so the building was kind of like contextual, but I had done an extension that was like made with like plexiglass in the model, and I wanted to blend in with a park, like a tiny green pocket that was nearby. So I had printed like green leaf on trace paper and put it in the back of the plexiglass, so it looked like a green, greenhouse box attached to this Haussmannian building.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know about this.
That sounds cool to me.
Blending the old and new, it's a little bit rough right there.
I mean, what are you going to do next to a Haussmann building? I mean, like,
and people in my class were like, wow, that's so cool. How did you do that? I'm like, just print it on trace paper, put it behind a piece of clear plastic,
Yeah, that's the fun stuff, though. That's the fun stuff.
It was funny because I don't think anyone at that age, in first year, we were taking ourselves too seriously. Like I think
that's important too.
Like I think we were still kids and kind of having fun. I mean, although probably some of us were taking things like very seriously and were trying to do something like the best project or whatever. But I feel like we were all kind of like not really knowing what we were doing and just kind of like playing along and coming up with some weird ideas and see what happened.
You have to. That's a good mentality to have as a way to get through it. I'll say another story. So during second year, which was just as brutal as first year, and maybe even, actually, I would say second year was the most difficult year in terms of the mental, the psychology of trying to like work on things. It was so difficult, so difficult. And I specifically, I don't know if any of my old classmates are listening, but second quarter, second year. So it was winter quarter at Cal Poly. We had the studio. And anyone who was in that studio, if they were listening to this, they would agree with me. I can guarantee everyone in that studio, that stands out to them as being one of the most pivotal, fun, chaotic, crazy, exciting studios I've ever been a part of as a student and ever seen as a teacher. And I know everyone would agree. It was a massive amount of work. Some of my best friends came from that studio. A lot of people are still very close from that studio. It was the right chemistry of people. It was the right time. It was the right place. It was the right assignment. It was the right mix for a shit show. It was the right mix for a shit show. And it just happened, right? And nothing like that ever happened again. It's actually phenomenal when you think about it, like the relationships you find in school. I lost my track of thought now. Oh, but so in actually it wasn't that studio, the previous one, second year, first quarter, you're still very, very young, super green. And the first assignment from this teacher was to, you have your first day of class. Everyone's like, where are we sitting? Like, who am I sitting next to? Like, my name's David. What's your name? And then, you have this teacher. It's like, okay, everyone, your first assignment that's due in 2 days from now. And you're like, oh gosh, something due already in 2 days. They're like, okay, you're going to bring in a collage, and the collage is going to be on a 12 inches by 12 inches piece of cardboard, and we're going to pin them on the wall, and it's going to be a collage that represents yourself.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
And
That's deep right there.
and so everyone
So you just put pictures of yourself? That would be my first thought.
just different angles of the head. That would have been one of the most interesting ones to put up if someone did that. So as you can expect, everyone gets a 12 by 12 piece of cardboard. They put on their some drawings and some printed images of like themselves with family and friends. Maybe there's a photograph of like a wedding ring if someone got married, or a photograph of like Hawaii because they're from Hawaii, and maybe an image of a book that's meaningful to them. But people spent time, like the collages, like for the most part, had a lot of stuff in them, and people were like really thinking about, what are the things in my life that really impacted me in my life? I'm going to put it on this 12 by 12 thing that defines who I am. So we get to class. It was on that, next Wednesday. The teacher says, okay, pin them up in a perfect grid on the wall, which is itself is an exercise. So we're all like, okay, we got to figure this out. And who's going to lead the group? And you're like, okay, that's the person's leading, but they shouldn't be leading because they don't know what they're doing. And you pin up a perfect grid of all these collages and it was a combined, it was 2 studios in one big space.
Okay.
So you had like 30 or 35 students.
Wow.
So this beautiful wall of all these different images. Then we're all sitting in bring all the chairs. We're sitting around the chairs like this with our notebooks because we're all good students. We have our moleskins. We're sitting there. And then the 2 of the teachers are up there. And one teacher has his hand on his hip. He's walking around, up, back and forth, looking at the collages. And then not saying anything, right? Then he kind of walks away. And we're like, where's he going? He grabs a trash can, drags the trash can over, and then takes the first one down, throws in the trash can. The second one, trash can. What? And he repeated that until he completed the entire fucking wall. Wasn't like, 1 or 2 to prove. He took all of them and threw them in the trash. And although it was only a 2D assignment, like people were pretty dedicated. People spent like hours on this thing, and like printing stuff and like making stuff fit, all of them in the trash. And he said, like, these are all garbage. These are not collages of who you are. And of course, there's a shock value to that way of teaching. Some people would disagree with it because it's kind of like you're just putting on a performance, right? But I will tell you this. It has some kind of impact because I still remember it to this day. There's a lot of things from the studio I remember.
What did you put on yours?
I do remember one thing, and it was an image of Calvin and Hobbes, because when I was a kid, I read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes, which is a beautiful comic cartoon. And that went in the trash too. I'm like, but it was Calvin and Hobbes. Like, come on, like that's pretty good. And so I still remember that to this day. And what it did was in the first 2 days of that class, of that quarter, of that year, because it was first quarter, second year, it taught all of us, like, we have no idea what we're getting into. Whatever is you think is going to take place, and whatever you think is correct, it's not. And it was that as a lesson was not conscious, I think, to most students, but it was there. You could feel it. You could feel it. Like, okay, we don't know what's going to happen. We're like in the Hunger Games now. I don't know what's going to take place.
Yeah, they're going to start chopping heads.
And then, of course, he said, like, try again. And then everyone, I think we did an in-class exercise to try again, and no one could figure it out. And then he coaches you and says, no, this is what we're going to do. And what it ended up being is everyone produced a collage that was an abstract collage of who they are as a person.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And that led to the next assignment and the next assignment.
And they don't really care about seeing you on the beach on the vacation in August with your family. Like, why would
Exactly. And so it was just... It was the same thing happened again too. And I think it was maybe the next assignment or the same time they were asked to design to make a 3x3 or 4x4 cube, physical cube, and one was meant to be an Uber cube, Uber, like Uber cube, and another was meant to be an uncube. And we're like, what the hell does that mean? Right? And the teacher says, okay, well, I'll give you an example. I'll tell you this. He said, imagine if you had...
Ball.
Huh?
Make a ball.
He said, imagine you had a 4x4 cube and it was made out of solid gold, polished, and it was ultra precise, so the edges you could cut yourself on. You would say that's an Uber cube. And all of us were like, yeah, that would be an Uber cube for sure. I don't know why it is. precision and whatever. But yeah, Uber cube. It's like, okay, go make one and come back in 2 days. So same thing. We put them on the table. All of these cubes, really cool to see, like, 50, whatever, 60 cubes laid out. Trash, all in the trash. And I forget what he said with that one too, but it was like, it was just, I don't know. It stuck with me. And it's just kind of a silly throwaway thing in case of the cubes, because I don't remember what happened. I think the one that I made was like, my second iteration of the Uber cube was the Uber one had like different colors on each side, and there was a plexi. So like depending on how you oriented, like you would see different things. The Uncube was this, I don't know why I'm talking about this now. The Uncube was a wire frame. So it didn't look like a cube unless it cast a shadow from a certain direction. Not bad. Not bad.
Not bad at all.
So, but anyway, so those things happen, right? And I think as a student, you can expect those kinds of feelings to take place, whether it's through a shock collage that gets tossed into the garbage by a teacher, or it's something else that's more at your own desk. But it's going to happen,
The first assignment with the collage of like, yourself is very interesting. And I could see how, it's kind of a little bit harsh.
Of course.
But in a way, I think it's smart because, you want honest feedback throughout your 5 years of schooling, right? You don't want to be like, oh, you're doing so great, but the work is shit. Like, that's not how you improve and learn. Yeah. So I think kind of setting expectation that, being disappointed or feeling like your work is rejected, it's not pleasant, and I'm not saying that every teacher should constantly do that to every student, but I think it's good for a student to experience that because it makes you more resilient, it pushes you harder, and it also makes you question your own work. I feel like I've seen a lot of students who are very convinced that their work is great.
Ah, yes.
And I'm like...
You shouldn't feel that way.
I mean, I myself probably had that feeling on some of my projects, but I feel like it's healthier to think, even as a professional working with clients, that your work could always be better.
The door should always be left a little bit open.
Yeah.
Always. Always, always, always. Yeah. And one of my concerns, and we should wrap this up, one of my concerns is that in general, the honesty, like you said, I've always thought about, I don't know why I thought about it this way, but I always thought about the design studio as being a church. I'm not a religious person, but I always thought about it as being a church in that it is a place of solitude, like where we are kind of in a way separated from the outside world. We contemplate about the outside world and we produce stuff, we have discussions, but we're not so concerned with it. And it's also a place of just, it's pure honesty. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no being mean for being mean. It's just honesty, and the fact that all those things we did.
That's what church is all about. Sure.
Yeah, I know. My church would be like that, and the fact that those collages were garbage, and you threw them in the trash and said these don't reflect you. There's a little showmanship, but it's true, and my concern is that we don't want to allow the positive shifts in architecture school and society of mental health, being kind to one another, having good physical health. We don't want that to allow or create a space where we're now not allowed to be honest. Like I've had students where I'm not mean. I'm not like, ew, why did you do that? I just say, this doesn't make sense because blah, blah, blah. And they're like, I'm like, what are you complaining about? You're a 4th year student. Grow up. Like, why are you shocked that I'm telling you your thing is not good? I never told a student it sucks. I'd be like, yeah, it's not working. It's not good. That's the truth. It's not good. Yeah. And yet some of them are like, oh, we're so mean. I'm like, who has been teaching you and raising you the last 18 years of your life? No. And design is one of those spaces where we cannot allow this kind of, I call it soft, actually what it is fakeness to invade the design space. It needs to be kept pure, and pure in the sense of it's honest, and if it's not good, it's not good. And if you don't like that, get over it, right? And I think that's a lot of what architecture schools in the first few years, and that's also, it's a jarring thing, but that's also, any architecture student, if they make it through, because they're not babies, they're like, yeah, this was good. And And this is what's just also what you should be wanting this.
You know, I really like what I think it was Mark Lee that we interviewed who said like he doesn't want his students to be doing their best work in school.
Yeah, it's a great line.
And I'm like, I wish that every teacher in school, any school actually, would state that the first day of class.
Yeah.
Because then you know that it's not about like doing the best project and pleasing the teacher. It's about learning. And you're there to try and fail and try again and fail again and repeat and improve and learn and grow, right? And there is this misconception, and I think it's based from like the earlier education, you know, in junior high, in high school, right? Like, you gotta be at the top. Always gotta be at the top. You gotta do your thing. You gotta deliver, and you be at the top. And it's not an equation in creative schools. At least it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So I think it would be great if teachers could kind of like set the mindset in the right direction from the get-go, because I do think that a lot of students get maybe discouraged by architecture because of those kinds of feedbacks that they were not expecting, they're not prepared for, and therefore like they don't know how to receive or process, and then they just quit, you know. And I'm kind of like, well, I mean, it probably comes a little bit from it's probably partially their fault and the teacher's fault. And
there's a balance,
you know,
of course,
it's a balance. But I feel like, again, if communication was just a little bit clearer at the beginning, like we kind of know like how you know, what we might expect and what we like the way we should be thinking. Like, I think it would be different.
Any architect who's now an architect will agree with everything I've said. I guarantee it. And it's also because I think more and more these days with the way media works, there's just a lot of bullshit. There's a lot of fakeness. I don't mean just like fake news,
there is,
but there's also like this not on it. Like no one's saying like what it is, right? For ulterior motives, whether it be out of fear or because I want to gain something. And for me and where I am now, and because of architecture school mostly, I find great peace and solitude and calmness when I'm in a space, design work mode on myself, or when I'm working with you or other people, where we can have honest conversations, objective conversations about how we feel and what we think about this thing that I've done. That to me is, I just want to live in that space. Yeah. Right. And if we don't allow and encourage that space to exist and preserve it at this point in time, you need to. You have to. It's all. I mean, this sounds kind of wacko, but it's almost like the reason why I like the word church, because it always felt to me that type of dialogue is almost, it's outside of the normal realm of society.
It's a safe space.
It's sort of like we're monks or something, you know? Like we're not playing the game of like, oh, well, you did a really good job trying, and oh, well, maybe it's good. No, if it's bad, it's bad. I'm going to tell you it's bad, and I'm going to tell you how you can improve it or whatever.
I mean, if you
else.
look at sports, right? A coach that's coaching an athlete a coach is coaching an athlete to win a competition, right? Now, it might not be the Olympics, but it could be like a competition, because that's what professional athletes do. They train to win. That's kind of their goal. Well, if the coach is like, well, you know, you did good today. You ran for like 5 seconds more than yesterday. This is great. Do you think this person is going to go very far in their athlete career? Like, oh, do you want a break during your run? Because I think you look tired. Like, no. Exactly. The coach is going to be like, hey, man, okay, this was 5 seconds more than last time. I think you could do way better. And we're on a tight schedule here. Like, this is your goal. That's where you want to go. Like, you got to do that, you know? Like, I'm not saying we have to be dicks in school to students. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think we still have to keep, like, honesty, like 100% hard work, 100% dedication, communication. I mean, you know,
being a cheerleader is one of the major hats that a teacher has to wear when you're teaching undergraduate students. There's no doubt about that. And every student is different. But so anyway, so I think that's true. That's, you know, the last thing I'll say too is it's funny. I think with the show, the thing that there's a lot of people who like our show, and there's definitely a group of people who despise our show because they've listened to one episode and they listened to like a few, there's a couple minutes of like whatever I've said or you said and they don't like it, and I hate you. But the people who like the show, there's a number of reasons, but one of the things we hear consistently is because, well, these people are actually like speaking in a more casual way, but also they're speaking close to what we actually think. I mean, it is actually what we think. I mean, we're aware of a threshold we don't cross because this is we're not a political show, we're not whatever else, but people appreciate that. And I'm like, yeah, well, if you appreciate that, then we need more of that in general. And architecture school and learning design, you got to have that. Yeah. And and talking from a person who wants to learn design and trying to get back to the flow state thing, the flow state also requires you to be honest with yourself and be critical, but not get hung up on things like you were saying earlier. Yeah. But it requires that. And if you don't let in the criticism and that level of honesty, you're not going to be a good designer. You just won't be. And it's actually this very, very dangerous territory, as you said, especially when you're a younger architect or designer and you just think you're the greatest and you're not listening to anyone else. That's scary territory. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't believe in yourself, but again, that door always should be cracked open a little bit. Yeah. Even if your public persona in the press is not that way. I don't care for Olsen Koenig. I don't care for Foster. I don't care for, Hadid's not around anymore. I don't care who. That door should be cracked open a little bit. It has to. It has to. Yeah. All right. Okay. I thought we were going to be done like in an hour with this one. We went on a little. So we sort of talked about flow state a little bit. One last thing, piece of advice. Anyone who's trying to get into that state of working, it's very common for students to have two monitors. Do not play a movie on the second monitor.
What? Would you be doing that?
This was super common when I was in school, and it's even more common probably now because everyone's streaming things. Don't be watching Stranger Things or Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or whatever else on that second monitor while you're working. It does not work. And I'll say this also. When I'm actually deep in the flow state, I do not need anything. Yeah. I do not need music. In fact, I prefer no music. I don't want movies, or I don't need a podcast unless it's this one. I don't need the music. I don't need anything. I'm in that state. And that's the point you want to get at. And you can't do that if you're learning and you have, whatever else in the background.
There is a time and place for everything.
Yeah.
A movie is not when you make a model.
No. All right, that's it. Give us an outro.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode. If you like the show, please subscribe and rate it. We are available on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much all of the podcast platforms. We also have the website, Second Studio Pod, where all of the episodes are. You can find us on Instagram as well at Second Studio Pod. We post pretty often throughout the week some clips, some work guest images.
Share with your friends.
Share with your friends, your family, your parents, your grandparents, whoever is interested. Share it around. And we also have the hotline that you can call or leave a text message.
Yep, which is 213-222-6950. So you can text. It actually goes to my cell phone, and then I'll try to reply to you if you have any questions. Beyond that, thank you for listening. Keep going. If you're one of these people who are in school and you're struggling like I was describing, just keep going. Just keep going.
It's normal. Struggle is normal.
And it'll be good.
Yeah.
That's it. Talk soon. Thanks and bye.
Bye-bye.